Hi, Michael Force here again with Rise. Welcome to our digital mastery course here. We're still deep in it here on lesson number 9 here, name power, how to create the ultimate business name. If maybe you have a hard time with coming up with a domain name, or maybe you have a hard time coming up with how to name your business, all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to break down exactly how to do that so you're really, really clear on the power of naming, not just your company name, but also your product names, maybe your content names, your webinars, any kind of naming that you would need to. Think about Digital Altitude. I came up with Digital Altitude and all the branding behind it with all the products, Aspire to Base to Rise. I wanted to create a metaphor for climbing a mountain because success is a mountain. So I really wanted to make sure that we had really solid names around it. And so I dug in for a couple of months and came up with all of that branding, all that names. So I'm going to teach you how to do that as well. It's incredibly powerful. Think about all the Fortune 500 companies. Think about all the music you love or all the different products or services you buy. Have pretty cool and powerful names. And I'm going to teach you how to come up with some for yourself, your own passion, interest, or idea, and or just your own personal brand when you want to promote Digital Altitude. So let's jump into lesson number 9, and I'll see you on the inside. Michael Force here again. Welcome to lesson number 9 of the Rise Digital Marketing Mastery course here. We are going to talk about the power of a name, how to create the ultimate business and or product or service name. So let's jump into it here. Naming is really the ultimate leverage. There's absolutely no way you can get so much instant value as by choosing a great name for your business, product, or service. It's impossible to find any way else you can get so much bang for your buck. So what do I mean by this? I mean that all of the work that we're doing is to discover how human beings think, right? How their emotional systems work, how to get inside of their minds and their spirits, how to find their specific hot buttons, and all the other things that trigger them and drive them to decide and act in your favor. We do all this in order to understand everything about our customer avatar. And we try to learn the phrases and words they use, and even the tones of their voice. But with all this, what's the word that you are going to use more than any other word in the future regarding marketing your products or services? Well, just like when it comes to you, personally, your name is the word that definitely is most meaningful to you and that which carries the most powerful emotional associations. Therefore, the name of your product can carry the most power and get you the most bang for your buck because it's the thing that's going to stand for all the rest. It's the name that will represent everything your business, product, or service stands for. Seems like a pretty hefty responsibility for one word or phrase. So choosing a good name for your business, product, or service is where you get really, really high leverage. And ultimately, I think that designing and architecting a great name for your business, a great name for your product, and a great name for your service is one of the highest forms of marketing. First, create a name that's absolutely impossible for customers to forget. Interestingly enough, don't focus on creating a name that's easy for your customers to remember. Instead, focus on creating a name that's impossible to forget. You're probably asking yourself, but what is the difference, Michael? I'm telling you to create a name that's impossible to forget. Why not just create something that's easy to remember? Memory, like many other processes that are going on inside of humans, is not a conscious process. Most of the things that we remember aren't remembered because we sat down and said, okay, I'm just going to remember this thing, and I'm going to remember this thing. Most of the things that we remember, we just somehow remembered as if there's some mysterious process of screening out there that things are important that we remember or don't remember. Unfortunately, many things we don't want to remember ending up getting stuck in our memory, so we do remember them. And many things that we do want to remember end up somehow leaving our memories, even though we really do want to remember them, like a lost phone number. I'm still trying to remember what even mine is. Now, we don't have all the time to go into all of this, into the psychology of memory and the neuroscience behind it, but what I can tell you is that if you try to create something that's easy to remember, you're going to automatically focus on something logical, cute, or those things that you like. Whereas if you focus on creating something that's impossible to forget, then it's going to cause you to approach the task as sort of a marketing challenge that you are going to work on until you get it. This is why we want you to approach the task as something you'll see as a marketing challenge, as something you want to keep working on until you get it right. We don't want you to approach the task of naming your product as it's just some cute, logical, and nice words you can think of. Where would the sense of urgency be in that? So again, don't create a name that's nice and easy to remember. Focus on creating one that's impossible to forget, that makes an impact, that will have the customer saying, I definitely know what that means, and I'm not going to forget that. Or more specifically, one that will make their emotional system in their brains say that. The mind remembers names by sound, not by sight. This is really important insight that I've gotten from Jack Trout, one of the co-authors of Positioning, and also from Roy Williams, the creator of Wizards of the Ads books. Names are sounds before they are printed words. So focus on the sound of a name. In particular, primarily repetitive and rhythmic sounds will always win the day here. So it's useful here to think of alliteration, of rhymes, and of various types of rhythm, which we'll talk about in just a second. The important thing here is not to create a name that looks good or that's logical or that would make for a nice logo, but to create a name that sounds like something a mind would remember. And it turns out that repetitive and rhythmic sounds are the ones that really stick inside of the mind. So we're going to focus on the sound of names, not on the look, not on the logic, and not on whether they're literally true, all of which, unfortunately, most people do. Again, avoid cute or funny names. Spending money is serious business, and most people don't want to laugh when they're doing it. If you look at the top companies in the world, the ones that make a lot of money, those that dominate their markets, they rarely have cute or funny names, and they rarely use wordplay for comedy in the naming of their businesses, products, or services. Now, along with making the name that works for the ear that sounds good, we want to use names that promise results, benefits, and solutions if possible. Or at least we want to attempt to say what the nature of that particular business, product, or service is in some way or another. And if we're not going to outright say that the nature of the business or product or service is, we at least want some kind of association so that the mind can connect what the name is and what it is that you're selling. If you have enough time and discipline, pick a word or a combination of words that doesn't have any meaning, or then you can attach meaning to it. But for now, better to use a name that promises results, benefits, and solutions if possible. Otherwise, to at least pick a name that is associated with what it actually is. Most people think that the process of naming is something very different from their marketing tasks, so they tend to just forget everything they've learned about marketing. We do not want to do that. In order to create a name that promises a specific benefit, you must go back to what fears and frustrations your customers have, to what wants and aspirations they desire. Go back to what your customers are actually saying, and choose words from those lists to consider for a name, and specifically, try to choose words that promise a benefit, solution, or result. Okay, so back to some of the concepts around sound. Rhythm makes names much stickier in the mind. We humans have a system called a phonological loop that acts as a sort of auditory buffer, a sort of a filter that decides whether to keep certain things in or to throw them out. Imagine hearing a sound that goes into your mind and it bounces around in your brain for a while. Then your mind asks itself, is this something that I can record or is this something I should throw out? The process is called phonological loop. That's what does this. This entire process takes about 5 seconds or so from what I understand. If something keeps bouncing around inside of the phonological loop, it's much more likely to get committed to long-term chemical memory. If it doesn't bounce around, it literally goes in one ear and out the other. And we'll move on to the next sound. So, as you've probably concluded, the longer we can keep things bouncing around in the loop, the more committed our minds are to keeping it in our long-term memories. Therefore, if we can use repetitive and rhythmic sounds to keep names bouncing around longer in there, we are more likely to be committed to them to long-term memory. We'll talk about some examples in a minute. So make sure you use and include some kind of alliteration, rhythm, or when you're creating a name. Think about songs, think about movies, think about that kind of stuff. A lot of money, time, effort, and energy goes into creating those. Use and include alliteration, which is the same sound at the beginning of two words. Use rhythm, which is the same sound at the end of two or more words. And use rhythm, which has a kind of repetitive meter to it and powerful associations or connections to what the name is in the first place. So let's go ahead and hear a few of your favorite examples so we can analyze them to see how they, look for repetitive sounds. One of the most valuable brand names in the world is Coca-Cola. Do you notice the alliteration? The two similar sounds at the beginning of each of the two words? Coca-Cola. And there's even a C in the middle of the first word, coca. Do you notice the rhythm at the end of the same ending of each of the two words? Ka and la, ko and ka, ko and la. Also, Coca-Cola does what it is now, basically, it's a cola. And it also says what it used to have when it was first established, coca. Cola, or basically drugged cola, when I guessed that they knew their marketing back then, even under the influence. Anyways, if you ask me, it's no surprise that Coca-Cola is the dominant cola, and that it has been dominant forever, and that it probably will be forever. It simply has the better name. You literally can never forget it, even if you tried. It's as sticky as a bad ex-girlfriend. Another one that I like is 3 Day Blinds. Now, this one here, okay, the sound of this one isn't quite perfect, doesn't have the exact duration, but when this name has going for it is the promises, a clear and specific benefit which makes it sound so powerful. 3 Day Blinds. It has a nice rhythm to it as well, 3 Day Blinds. And it just kind of rolls off the tongue that if you need blinds, you instantly remember 3 Day Blinds because you know that's fast and that's what you usually need with blinds. In fact, I recently moved to a new place that has these big windows, so obviously we needed some blinds as soon as possible. Although we didn't actually go to 3 Day Blinds since we had a connection somewhere else, I'll tell you what. Speed was a very important part of our decision-making process, and therefore the name 3 Day Blinds focuses on making it clear that it satisfies the critical need that would undoubtedly be present for the particular market segment looking for blinds. Another name, YouTube. If you've seen the logo, it's a little picture of a television and a tube, which is the term that people use to refer to the television. Let's watch the tube. You also notice the rhyme here, YouTube. It has a really nice little rhythm, YouTube. You know how to say it. Everyone says it's the same way. When you hear that repetitive sound, you can say, oh, what was that? YouTube. On another one, Bed Bath & Beyond. Bed, Bath & Beyond. Notice the alliterations, B, 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 B. And notice the rhythm, Bed Bath & Beyond. Bed Bath & Beyond. And there are many other examples of names out there that use repetitive sounds and that promise benefits, associations, and results. So start looking out for good names when you see or hear them and try to understand why they may be good names or bad names in many cases. Actually, in my opinion, most business names are just absolutely horrible nowadays. Most names don't work in business. Most of them are just simply not memorable. They don't provide any real kind of promise. They have no rhythm, and there's no reason to remember them. So let's do a quick exercise, designing a powerful name. You should have an exercise. Grab a pen and paper here. The name that you give your product or service is the highest leverage in marketing, as I said before. You should ultimately choose to design a name that's appealing to hear, not to the eye, because that's not how a brain remembers it. Focus on repetitive sounds, rhythmic syllables, and powerful associations, especially to benefits, results, and solutions when possible. Remember at the top, it says to design a powerful name. It doesn't say to design a cute name, a funny name, or a clever name, but it says to make yourself a powerful name. So let's invest some time, effort, and energy to create a great name. So the first question, what are the words that most specifically and powerfully describe the result, benefit, or solution you provide to your customer? What do they get at the end of the day? Next, ask yourself this question. Can you combine words in a way that create a repetitive sound, either through alliteration or rhyme? And then finally, can you combine words in a way that has rhythm, that can keep the name bouncing around in the mind for those extra few vital seconds required to commit the name to long-term memory? All right, let's do this exercise, and I will see you on the next lesson. Take care.